It is sad that we still know more about space than our own oceans. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Month of Thrills. Today on the agenda is Dagon, or at least that's how I think you're pronouncing it. Some kind of H.P. Lovecraft horror kind of thing. Let's begin. Dagon is a faithful interactive adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work, focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, action sequence, or inventory management here, and movement is limited to progressing through locations, along with the plot. Okay, so it's more of a walking sim. Who says that every horror game has to be difficult?
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
During the game, you will encounter interactive objects, some of which will allow you to continue your journey, others reveal interesting facts about the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find these secrets, focus your eyes and look for the Elder sign. You can also access all the found facts later. They will be available in the main menu. Already this is giving me a sort of What Remains of Edith Finch in that other game whose name I can't quite remember. That comes to mind. Maybe Layers of Fear,
Penniless,
too.
And at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Oh, okay, he's already planning on ending it.
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
I see. Oh, that was a question mark.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Probably better that I focus anyway.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation.
If I had to guess, that's the blood of fish.
So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
I see. It seems it's not even a walking sim, really. It's more of a point-and-click kind of thing.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Then again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just setting things up. That makes sense.
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
Okay. Nice oceanic area. Oh, you can do almost 360 degrees, or at least like 270 or something. It's more than I had.
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
Yeah. And the sun.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Kill your story. What's that?
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue.
I have to stare in the sunlight. Stare at the sun, I mean.
The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know. For my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Does that mean you were in a deep sleep? This is where things get Lovecrafty. The tentacles.
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see.
Perhaps I could use that octopus's leverage and get on top of it. Or squid, I mean.
And in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished.
I see.
For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core.
What might that be?
The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear.
Is that so?
The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the marsh is reflecting... Dagon seems to be inspired by Fishhead, a short novel by Irvin S. Cobb about unnatural affinities between a hybrid idiot and the strange fish of an isolated lake. And Lovecraft's dream about a strange island emerging from the ocean, and him crawling in the ooze that covered its surface. I dreamed that whole hideous crawl, and yet I could feel the ooze sucking me down. In defense of Dagon. Lovecraft's interest in the topic stemmed from his aversion to fish and sea smells. In his own words, I have hated fish and feared the sea and everything connected with it since I was 2 years old. But I cannot recall what earlier experience gave me such a profound and lasting aversion to the sea and seafood. That's peculiar. Time to get out of this muck.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position.
What?
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
I see.
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Indeed. It's rather bizarre, isn't it? A dead fish.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time.
So I might be able to...
That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
Maybe. That would certainly be handy, wouldn't it?
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
Yeah. You got bigger things to worry about. Bigger fish on your plate, so to speak. It is a clicking simulator.
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
I see. Shame I can't wander around and appreciate this. Oh, okay. Now we get to look around. Was Jonah here?
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still traveled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
Looks closer to me. Much bigger. Then again...
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance.
Really?
an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill.
I can see why.
I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain.
How peculiar.
I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again.
I would imagine so.
And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy.
Perhaps.
Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset.
It would indeed be cooler, which means your body wouldn't be heating as much.
Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Okay. Yeah, just as I thought, that's the...
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me.
Right.
But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night.
I can see down there.
Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness.
Well,
as the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined.
I would imagine not.
Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent.
I see. Hopefully you find something down there.
Whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
Well, better jump down.
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated.
There's something sticking out. It looks almost like a cube.
All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
That it did. It's good to know it's becoming very highlighted.
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
But that's too perfect of a square. Rectangle, or rather, a cube. There's no way that was made naturally.
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature.
He basically said what I just said.
A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
It's man-made, or something with intelligence of man.
For despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith.
That it is.
Whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures.
Worshipping would be a bit much.
Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
I'd better look around. At the game space.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm.
There are symbols appearing on it.
And revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures.
Rather interesting. I guess they were worshipping that thing. At least now it looks like it. There doesn't appear to be any other clues, so...
The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books.
Is that Cthulhu?
Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like.
It's pretty much circled around an octopus, centered around it. So I'm thinking Cthulhu. This is Lovecraft after all.
Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain.
Yeah.
It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
That one, right? Dagon contains many themes and storytelling methods that Lovecraft developed in his later works, such as telling the story through carvings, At the Mountains of Madness, The Nameless City, journals and characters' notes, The Shadow Out of Time, The Haunter of the Dark, Islands Emerging from the Ocean, The Call of Cthulhu, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies, Migo and the Whisper in Darkness. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon, but let's skip the details in order not to spoil the ending. Ooh, sounds fun.
Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited...
Oh, my bad, I didn't realize you could skip over his
I
dialogue.
think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men.
They look like fish creatures.
Though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine, which appeared to be under the waves as well.
Perhaps these were aquatic man.
Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail,
Huh.
for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background.
Probably to preserve the detail.
For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself.
Or maybe that was to scale.
I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe.
Who knows?
Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born.
Is that so? There's not much I can actually go look at.
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me.
That means strange, by the way.
Then, suddenly, I saw it.
What? What'd you see?
With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters.
Oh boy, here comes something big.
Loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith,
I mean you no harm. I come in peace.
about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
You don't have to kill me. I will not oppose you.
I went mad then.
I would not dare to oppose you.
Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
I see. I can see why you'd want to get the hell out of there too.
I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing.
This is so crazy, I'm getting the hell up out of here. Hell up out of here. Hell up out of here.
Indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat.
Will the ocean reappear?
At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other
I don't see anything appearing, so...
When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital.
Perhaps you were hallucinating out in sea. You shouldn't have drank the seawater, man. Not good for you.
Brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean.
Delirious but free. Achievement unlocked.
In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention.
Huh.
Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Can you blame them? It sounds like you hallucinated, man. I mean, come on. That's pretty much what it sounds like to me. Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalism in 1915. He started publishing his own journal called The Conservative, which included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticism written by him and other authors. Howard was a skilled wordsmith, but he also took criticisms to heart, which resulted in his decision to step away from writing poetry and concentrate on weird fiction again. For the first time since his teenage years, Dagon, published in 1917, is one of the short stories written during that period. In this example excerpt from The Conservative, the master of horror fiction explains his attitude towards warfare and the idea of world peace. Okay, one or more nations would undoubtedly remain secret armaments and at the proper time take advantage of their more altruistic and less astute contemporaries in a wild career of conquest against unarmed victims. No country is or ever can be above warfare until the basic impulse of the human animal shall have miraculously changed. I can't exactly disagree with that. Human nature is a stubborn thing. People think that, oh, we can just change how the human mind works and we can just achieve everlasting peace and altruism. No. The human nature at its core is greed. It may not be always bad greed, but everyone is greedy. And being selfish is more natural than being selfless. You pretty much have to train yourself and learn how to be selfless and consider others. So it's probably not possible to make everyone altruistic. You always have to be on the lookout for that. I'm just saying.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
I see. Is this from the philosopher's standpoint of view, or his? Dagon was the main deity the Philistines worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. The rulers of Akkad chose him as the patron saint of their war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in an Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warder in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to the wrong interpretation of his name, as in Hebrew the word dag means fish. In H.P. Lovecraft's works, Dagon is an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a humanoid race with fish traits that reside in the oceans. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. Dragon was actually in Super Metroid, so it was clearly a reference to Lovecraft. Go figure. Super Metroid had Lovecraft references. Of course, it was a mix of Dagon and Dragon.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
I see. I suppose that makes sense. August Derleth is an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works throughout his company, Arkham House. Although he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's works after his death, he is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involved introducing the good versus evil doctrine. Was devout Catholic to the Cthulhu mythos, which contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's works are often misunderstood and misrepresented in today's culture. It is also worth noting that Lovecraft was never really interested in creating a mythology, and the term Cthulhu mythos was coined by Derleth after the author left the mortal plane. Interesting tidbits, isn't it? I guess all we can do is leave, or perhaps turn up the clock. Oh, okay. Just do a zigzag, because the philosopher is an alligator.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing.
Do you now?
I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave.
I see. That's why he was hooked on it.
So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
I see. Lovecraft hated tobacco even though he used to smoke when he was 12 in order to look and feel like an adult. In his correspondence with friend Reinhard Kleiner, he claims that he quit as soon as he started wearing loose, long pants. He also had a very strong opinion about alcohol, as evident by his letter to Zela Brown. As for the matter of drinking, I have never tasted intoxicating liquor and never intend to. Having a strong aesthetic disgust at anything which blunts or coarsens the delicate natural equipos of the evolved human intellect and imagination. In other words, he doesn't want to ingest anything that's going to make him stupid. Drinking excited my personal repugnance. Hence I don't drink. Let the herd do what they want. I am rather in favor of prohibition, the prohibition of any one antisocial force as well as any other source, the spirit of revision. In other words, let the idiots do whatever they want. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Let the herd do what they will, and he's in favor of prohibition. Let them do what they want, but I want to criminalize it. Okay, that's weird.
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed.
It is sad that we still know more about space than our own oceans.
Worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite.
Oh, that looks like 10 Hours Below. At least I think it's what it's called. That indie game that I played a little bit of before Halloween, the Halloween month. Maybe that was inspired by Lovecraft. Well, of course it was. I mean, now looking back at it, it had a giant squid, it had the mermaid creatures that could have easily been these fish people, and then it had that creature, that snake-like creature that looks a lot like that. It was all Lovecraft inspired, of course it was.
I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
Huh. The Statue of Liberty, with creatures walking ever so slowly towards it. That's peculiar. When Lady Liberty is under attack,
The
again.
end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it.
I see. I suppose there's no getting out of it, is there?
It shall not find me.
Oh.
God, that hand!
That time it didn't prompt me to get through it.
The window! The window!
Maybe he was hallucinating, and that's why it seemed like he ended it. He never wanted to. It was just hallucinations from madness to oblivion. We hope you enjoyed immersing yourself in our little pool of cosmic horror. We would appreciate it if you took a moment to rate Dagon and check out our other games and DLCs. Maybe some other time. In the meantime, I've got to say that is it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in with me. Make sure to spread this video around like Dagon. And I will see you next time. Now go out there and capitalize on life. Peace out, have a good one, and don't let Cthulhu get you in your sleep. See you later.